Well, hi, and welcome back to another episode of Mr. Rodder's Neighborhood. Today, for our home block prep series, we're going to do the last and final step before our block is completely prepped and ready to rock and roll for assembly. We've already taken you through the steps of installing freeze plugs, cam bearings, and painting the block. And now we go to the final step, which is honing the block. Okay, and before I get into it, I wanted to answer a few questions about, what is the purpose of the hone, which hone to use, why, and what's it actually do. Okay, so in this case, this engine hasn't had any prior machine work. We didn't do any machine work to it because I was trying to keep the bore at a standard bore. It is a 70 block that I have factory replacement high compression 70 pistons for. So I was trying to keep the bore as standard as possible, as well as leave as much meat in the block as possible for any further rebuilds. This engine is to replace the 70 stage 1 engine that was in the car originally, and finding a block is really, they're few and far between anymore these days. But what I try to do is find a cream puff engine that had very few miles on it, that was a running engine to begin with, and it needed as little as possible. So I've only had it, it was cleaned and checked for cracks, and then I scrubbed the block down to bare metal, and we started from there. But before I go any further, I figured it was prudent that we talk about which hone to use and why. Okay, so this actually comes up quite a bit, and this is a topic that if you talk to 10 different engine builders, you might end up with 7 different answers. But from what I found in the past, this is the way it goes. So this is your basic dingle ball hone. You can buy these for just about anything. They are generally sized for what you're trying to work on, so you don't want to get a bore for, like, say, a big block Chevrolet and try to use it in 283. It's gonna be quite a bit tight, and it'll cut really fast. But the dingle ball hone, a lot of people think that this is the normal style hone that you would use for like a refreshing of an engine that already has miles on it. And this would be at the absolute last thing you would use for that kind of job, right? This came about really as the first option for honing an engine, and without having any machine work done to it. You're just trying to knock the glaze off the bore and stick some new rings and bearings in it and have at it, right? Well, these things became much more prolific in like the age of drag racing. So let's say the 50s through the 70s, where you already had an engine with a fresh bore on it. What you were doing is you're re-ringing it to get every ounce of power that you could in between rounds, especially like in the top fuel classes, where the engine might only have to run for 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It might be by the end you get to the end of the track and it's burned a hole in a piston. You're going to replace the piston. You're probably going to re-ring the engine anyway. That's where this dingle ball hone was primarily used, because it would knock the glaze off from the previous set of rings that had already somewhat seated, and you would just slap on a new ring and a new piston in that one cylinder and have at it. But as the home builder, the one I like to use is this. This is a 3-stone hone, and it has very fine stones on it. I bought it intentionally with the fine stones. But this one will actually, not only will it knock the glaze off, but it will correct some bore taper. It will correct a little bit of ring flutter areas in the block. And what you're hoping for is that you come up with a more true surface than what you had to begin with. It will knock down the high spots first, right? So if you look at whatever I guess it'd be the deepest point is, if you have a big scoring in the cylinder, it will take forever to get it out with this 3-stone hone. If you have a big scoring in the cylinder, you probably shouldn't be honing it anyway. You should probably be looking at boring it. But it depends how deep it is. Rule of thumb goes that if you can catch your fingernail on it you should probably look at having it machined. If you cannot catch your fingernail on it, you can probably get away with honing it, okay? But in our case, the bores actually are in really good shape because, like I said at the beginning of the show, it was a very low mileage motor that was running when I started. And I wanted something that was in very good shape to begin with, because I wanted the engine to stay as stock and simple as possible. That will give me years worth of rebuilds further down the road when these engines become much more difficult to find, especially in decent shape or that haven't had a bunch of rebuilds already. In this case, we're not rebuilding the engine. This is what they would call a refreshing of an engine. But really what we're going to do is just go through the simple process excuse me, of honing it today. And I wanted to actually do it, and then you can see as the process goes along what you're specifically looking at inside each cylinder, okay? But the 3-stone hone is the ideal hone for the home builder if you are wanting to refresh an engine that already has miles on it. Now, if it's been like, say, you just got it back from the machine shop and it's been sitting around for a couple of years, you had it in a bag and got a little moisture in there and the cylinder walls got some rust on them, this is your ideal candidate then, okay? This will work great because the cylinder is already round. This thing isn't gonna make the cylinder any more better or any better than what it really is. It's actually just gonna knock the glaze off from the previous set of rings, right? This one will do the job, and it will, I mean, short of taking it to a machine shop and having it professionally honed on a honing machine, this is probably your best option as a home builder, okay? So we'll lube this up and we'll get it going so that way you guys can have a bird's eye view of really how the block is going to turn out. So and then we'll follow along and I'll give you the basic rundowns, but this would be the last step for our basic block prep at home, and then your block will be, once it's honed, is completely ready to assemble. Okay, I like to start off with just a basic wipe down of each individual cylinder. So if there's any flashing in there, like I got a bunch of flash rust in there from when I cleaned the block originally, but this will kind of take it out and you'll have a basic idea of what you're looking at. Once you get the flash rust out, you can wipe it down with a little WD-40, but I like to do it without the WD-40 because just like when you wash your car, it always looks better after you wash it, because a lot of the scratches and stuff and imperfections in the paint are filled in with a little bit of water. Same thing happens with WD-40 when you put it in the cylinder. You don't have a 100% true picture of what the cylinder looks like. These purposes, I'm going to show you. All right, so here's my wiped down cylinder wall. You can see that there is a little bit of scratching in here. It's actually not very bad at all. There's very little that I can catch my fingernail on. I can't catch anything actually, but and it looks worse in this camera than what it really does in person. But this is the kind of stuff we're going to be trying to take out when you hone, all right? And that hone will take most of that out. But as you can see, the bottom of the cylinder is not the only place you get it. The top of the cylinder is where you get it as well. And it's all dependent upon really when the engine's running, which side of the piston is being loaded, right? In this engine, I don't think it was really, even though I call it a cream puff, it was not maintained all that well. It did have a lot of, I believe, bad oil in it. Like possibly they were running 1960s Pins oil or some Quaker State that had a lot of paraffin in it that caused the oil to not so much lubricate well, but it gummed up really bad. So now you have a basic idea of what the inside of the cylinder looks like. So then I take my WD, which I use for pretty much everything, and you're very liberal with squirting it around in the cylinder. It's just going to run out anyway, and that's why I always put rags and stuff under it. This will also keep pretty much anything else on the inside from rusting. That's why I always do this last, because you can't possibly do this and then paint it without having to scrub the block down entirely again. So, okay, so your base cone here is, it only really has 3 different settings on it. You got these like your storage position, so like so. Then you gotta line it up with the locks so that it's out. And then you adjust the tension here on the spring, and that's how much tension is on each one of these stones, right? How fast it's gonna cut, how much you're gonna take, right? And I like to just kind of, you look at where the thing's at, and I got it towards the top at the moment, just that I don't want to take a lot of material, and it's easier to just go back and do it again than it is to try to put material back in, okay? Or unscrew up what you've already done. Now let's zoom you back in so you can see. I got my glasses on here. Now you can see where the high and the low spots are. The dark spots are the low, and the high spots are the shiniest spots. So you have here at your ring ridge, generally the shiniest spot. Now I didn't have to cut anything. There was no real, I didn't have to ream it. There was no real ridge to begin with, but you can see it's evident in this block, and Buicks are always high nickel content blocks, so they don't normally have a big ridge, and most of it will go away. But as you can see at the very bottom of the bore, and then probably at the opposite, this is the top of the bore, is most likely the worst spots. And that's because the piston would probably be rocking back and forth based on power strokes and your compression strokes. So which side is the power on? You can't really see it too well there. I guess it's a little better. Okay, so you can see that there is some ring flutter that occurred in there. That's what's causing that, the misshapen parts there where you have the striations where it's dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, going down the bore. Okay, now what we're gonna do is and remember, this has only been like 10 seconds of me doing this. But all I'm trying to do is identify what we got going on in there, because you're going to try to remove a majority of this stuff. The scratches, some of them will disappear, right? Those are not too worrisome, because as a home builder, I mean, if you're a machinist, they're going to be like, yeah, bore that sucker out or run a super duper hone through there. But in reality, as a home builder, those scoring marks, majority of them will fill in with carbon. With a little bit of oil and some carbon, and you'll never see them again. You'll never even notice them. It won't even smoke or anything like that. What you're trying to do is remove some of the striations in here. And bore taper is something that you really can't, you can work at it with a hone like this. The biggest problem is going to be, and I really don't care if the thing smokes a little bit or is, you know, I'm not going to drive it that much. I'm going to be honest with you. It's going to sit in my garage most of the time. But I wanted to have stock stuff with standard bore so that I could use this engine for a long time. I don't think this car is ever going to leave my family, to be honest with you. So the idea was it's got to have enough material in there that it can make it, let's say, another 40, 50 years. Without having to do, I mean, it's not going to make it 40 or 50 years without having to be rebuilt. But now, right now, if I leave it as is, it has enough material in there for it to be rebuilt, let's say 10 years down the line, and it starts smoking, carrying on, and it doesn't, you know, it starts consuming a lot of oil. Now I can consider rebuilding it then, and there's cylinder wall left to bore, right? But right now, since it was a low mileage engine that was running to begin with, if we can just clean up some of this, it's going to easily last us another 10 years. All right, so now here's where we're going to get serious about it. It's going to have to be, we're going to try to take some of the striations out at the top. So that means we're going to spend a majority of our time at the top of the cylinder. Get yourself a fresh paper towel rag. You don't want to keep wiping the same thing down in there. Okay, so now you're gonna have a true idea of what it's looking like. It probably already looks better than what it did before. Some of this stuff is just not gonna come out. And you don't have to work at it forever, because in reality, it doesn't really, you'll never have the perfect surface because you didn't have it machined and bored and then honed with torque plates. But the whole purpose of that is not what we're doing. What we're doing is trying to save a standard bore block and, you know, push it down a little bit further down the road. Okay, so as you can see, some of the striations are already gone, right? So it's already evened up some of the markings in there. Also, if you notice, the ring groove here at the top it's actually gotten wider here at the top and a little bit narrower here, okay? Because it's starting to take some of that out. If you keep working at it, you can pretty much get almost all of it out, especially the striations in there where the rings, I believe, are fluttering. But a new set of rings will take care of the majority of that as long as we can get it sealed up, or the bore straightened up. The rings will seal up probably quite fine. But as you can see, it's slowly getting better. All right. And when you're doing this for a home builder project, you're not in a rush. You're doing this because you don't have a lot of money. So you have a lot of time if you don't have a lot of money. You can't have both at the same time, generally. If I had a lot of money, I wouldn't be doing it like this. Now, as you can see, the striations are pretty much fading away, becoming a thing of the past. Also, if you look here, the ring groove is starting to get wider here at the top because that's where the factory fresh material was. The ring stopped right here as the piston's going up and down. So this is untouched area. So this is what you're looking at from the factory right here. That would have been the factory bore. This area is starting to get smaller because these two areas next to it are getting wider. And it's taking up more room. Okay, sorry I didn't have the camera in there. You're probably looking around like, what are you talking about? But, okay. So if you look in the top, the striations are still somewhat there. And that's because as we're going with the hone in and out of the bore, like gravity's pulling down this way, right? So what I've done in the past is you flip the motor over 180 degrees and you would try to hone it from an upward angle where gravity's pulling it down on this side, right? If you want to try to even it out. Or you can try going straight up and down and turning the motor. So that's what I'm going to try to do next. Here's what we're looking at. All right, so you used to be able to see like 2, 3, 4 striations. Now you can only barely see just this second one here. This is just pretty much normal. This happens to almost every single engine. You're gonna have, that's essentially a ring groove. Chevrolet, they make ridge reamers just for that purpose because they score up so bad. And luckily the Buicks were always made with high nickel content block, so it does make them fairly hard, and they don't have a lot of ring ridge from that. Okay, well I think we're actually getting pretty good there. Just a couple more go rounds and we'll be ready to move on to the next cylinder. As you can see though, like you can start to see the cross hatches that they talk about.
Okay, and the ideal cross hatching, like Tony will tell you can't do, Uncle Tony will tell you that you can't do molly rings in one of these. The bore is too rough after you use the stones. But with the fine stone that I've had, I've done so many different molly rings that it may or may not work. They just seem to seat every time. But you want to get a crosshatch of about 45 degrees. And it's kind of hard to see in there because it just looks a little rough. And by looking at it, I'd say it's not quite 45. It's probably around 60. So I need to go reduce speed on the drill and increase my arm speed to achieve that 45 degree crosshatch. So what I was trying to do there is just increase arm speed, decrease drill speed. You might come up with a little bit better crosshatch that you can see the difference in between. You had to hone it anyway, so I figured why not hone it good enough where you can see it. Now this is just going to get some cast iron rings, so it doesn't really matter. They're going to seat. They'll be fine. I'm not building it like as a race engine. This is more or less something I just took the time to do the oiling mods on, everything. Like I already owned the tool, so it didn't cost me anything extra. It was more or less just put it back together, a stock engine, and see if I can get a couple of years out of it. I'm sure my son will want to rebuild it one day. Okay, let's see here if we can catch a good light in there. Okay, you can see the cross hatching, but I'm still a little bit fast on drill speed or slow on arm speed, however you want to look at it. It's probably a bit of both. But you just try to widen that up to where you get like almost a 45 degree angle. That's ideal. But in this situation, we're not going to use molly rings. This is going to be cast set rings. She should be fine. And as you can see, most of our striations during the top of the cylinder are almost completely gone. There's just a little bit of this one left. But she's pretty much ready to rock and roll. Okay. Well, hopefully this helped you out with doing some home block prep, save you a little bit of coin, throw a little bit of knowledge in the bank, and hope you enjoyed it somewhat. So if you have any questions, just put them down there in the bottom of the comment section. I'll try to get back to you. And I still got 7 more cylinders to go, so I'll see you tomorrow.